From Raw and Radical, this is On Display, a podcast about extraordinary women in the arts, their true stories and inspiration. I am Maureen Broadbeck, and every episode features a conversation with one great woman in the arts or music. There are dialogues about real-life challenges, exploring what it means to be a woman in creativity. Hi and welcome to On Display. Today we have a great guest. Her name is Dr. Asma Naeem. She is the chief curator of the Baltimore Museum of Art. Before that, she was a curator in prints, drawings, and media arts at the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. She is an art historian, curator, writer, keynote speaker, and lecturer. She has also taught courses on modern European art, American art from the Civil War to the present, and contemporary Islamic art. She holds a BA in art history and political science from Johns Hopkins University, a Juris Doctor from Temple University, an MA from American University, and a PhD from the University of Maryland. Before returning to art history, she practiced law as a prosecutor in Manhattan and Washington, D.C. Her publications include the recent published book Out of Earshot, Sounds and Technology in American Art, 1847 to 1897, and reviews for Art Forum and Journal of Middle East Women's Studies. The Baltimore Museum of Art is dedicating this entire year, 2020, to the work of female identifying artists, with 23 solo and group exhibitions, as well as programs and acquisition. It is called the 2020 Vision. Oh yeah. Hi, Asma. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Maureen. It's nice to be with you.
Thank you. I am so happy to have you here. You are the head curator of the Baltimore Museum of Art. And this year you have this wonderful project called 2020 Vision. Can you tell me about this idea? Where did it started? Where does it come from? How did you started with it, implement it, made it happen?
Sure. So many institutions have been thinking about how to commemorate the 19th Amendment, which allowed many women the right to vote. And was passed precisely 100 years ago this year.
Yeah.
And we were one of those institutions, and we wanted to think carefully and a little bit provocatively about how to commemorate this anniversary. And we have the benefit of having a chair of our board of trustees, who's a woman, Claire Zamoski-Siegel. And together with her and our director, Christopher Bedford, we decided that the best way to discuss the trajectory that women have made in the past 100 years was to devote an entire year of exhibitions to women artists or artists who identify as women, as well as to focus our acquisitions on works that were made by women for the year.
This is so wonderful. And so you have over 23 solo and group exhibition, you have program, you have an enormous amount that is dedicated for acquisitions, right, for the collection. And what struck me and what I think is really important is this idea of female identifying artists, because this underlines the time we live in. This is so important because it's probably the first time a museum talks that way about women and women in arts, right? Mm. For me, it's really a stamp on the period we're living. Everything we've been through the past couple of years, and everything that is finally coming out and coming to the general public. Can you talk about this term and why did you decide it was important to really put it forward?
Absolutely. I thank you for saying those kind words. It's something that we've been thinking about deeply for the past few years here at the Baltimore Museum of Art, in that gender fluidity is something that has come to the fore in so many different disciplines and so many different academic circles and so many institutional circles, but in a very kind of amorphous way. And people generally acknowledge the fluidity of gender and the ways that our peers and our colleagues are perhaps accepting this idea changes, or I should say, is not uniform across the board. And so what we were
Yeah.
thinking about is how various artists in our community, in the Baltimore City area and regions, how many artists in our community are gender fluid, how many artists in our community, some of them identify as women and don't present as women, or have different attitudes towards the idea of woman, and perhaps would feel excluded by our announcing this mandate. And so we thought that the best way to be inclusive and to acknowledge the variances in gender presentation was to have this kind of capacious approach and say that if you are identifying as a woman, that yes, we would be considering your work as a potential acquisition.
This is wonderful because, I really believe that being a woman is more about just the physical body. It's really a spirit, an energy, a feminine energy. And I think it's time that we all acknowledge this, and that we can balance our masculinity, our femininity, and we are, as artists, very free to do it and to talk about this subject. And we're always a bit in the forefront of what's happening in culture in general. So for a museum to acknowledge this is really wonderful. How did people receive it? How did people understood and took this idea?
The announcement in general, or just related to female identifying artists?
Oh, both actually.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think there's been a range of responses, and I think that's exactly what we were anticipating.
Yeah.
We live in a polyphonic society, obviously, and the freedom of expression is something that many Americans and those across the world hold dear. And we wanted to have input, frankly. So we have gotten the range of responses from anywhere to this is absolutely spectacular and way overdue. And that includes various children of women identifying artists and grandchildren of women identifying artists who are saying, please take a look at my mother or my grandmother's work. She toiled endlessly in her studio, sometimes with me on her lap, and created these works. And she ended up having, say, for example, a work being shown in a local museum or even the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in the 1940s and 50s. And now no one knows about her. So please take a look at her work and please consider it. So we've had those kinds of responses on the one hand. And on the other hand, we've had, the contrarian responses. The responses from those who feel that women don't need to be singled out, or female identifying artists don't need to be singled out, and that there is perhaps a discrimination that is reverse going on here. But I would say that is a minority, and it is something that is not heard all too often. Most of the responses have been positive, and I would also say some of the responses have been searching and questioning and saying, is this enough? Is this going to make a difference? Is this perhaps just a ploy? All those kinds of questions have been asked, and I think it's a necessary dialogue to have these kinds of questions being asked. And I had a friend, for example, who was talking with her father in their home in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia, and the father said, well, why do they need to do that? And so it ended up being a very productive conversation between my friend and her father, where she explained to him the various issues and obstacles that women and women artists have had to overcome and the necessity of this. So I think it's producing overall very generative conversations.
Yeah, and this is what it's all about, right? I mean, of course, you want to show the art, but the end result is conversation, is opening doors, is opening new ways of thinking, new ideas that will change the world and change how we understand things and how we can also expand our vision. So it's so unfortunate what's happening right now in the world, and that it actually comes this year of such an important year for the museum and for women. So I'm guessing the museum is closed right now, right?
Sadly, yes, we are closed. Right now, we're slated to open on Monday, April 28th, but that is something that is ever shifting, and we'll be
Yeah.
responding to the government, the federal and state government guidelines about reopening. So that is a fluid date at this point.
So how did you select the artist that you want to show for these exhibitions?
So I think that's always an interesting process, and I'm happy to share our thoughts. People are always curious about what happens behind the scenes in the curatorial world,
Yeah.
and I think this is a perfect example of the ways that we can be a little more transparent about what makes it into an exhibition presentation for any given year. For this year in particular, we were looking at a number of considerations. The primary one being to represent our city in which this institution is embedded, to think of artists
Yep.
who have had a lifeline to Baltimore City and have been based in Baltimore City or have come to Baltimore City for their artistic education. As you know, we have one of the premier art colleges in the country, the Maryland Institute College of Art, and there's been a number of incredible artists and teachers who have been associated with that institution. And we also have a number of extraordinary museums in the area. So we thought that this was one of the best ways to make sure that we created an anchor, if you will, in the exhibition presentation,
Yeah.
having a number of
Yeah.
Baltimore artists. So in fact, we do accomplish that. And I can talk about that more specifically, but some of the artists, for example, include Shanique Smith, Shan Wallace, Valerie Maynard, and Joe Smale, Alyssa Blount Moorhead, and the list can go on and on, to tell you the truth, but that's just a handful of artists who are associated with Baltimore. The second aspect that we were considering is to make sure that regardless of whether they're Baltimore-based or perhaps regional or internationally based, that they adhere to our standard of artistic excellence, which is always
Yep.
a bellwether for us in terms of what we present here at the museum, but also in terms of their activism and their approach to the social agenda of being a woman, whether it be formal concerns, just purely artistic or aesthetic concerns, or whether it's through more activist social justice means. So in that sense, we have a range of artists who are coming from different parts of the world. The two that come to mind very readily are Candice Breitz, who is a South African-born, now Berlin-based multimedia artist, primarily working in video installation. Her show is called Candice Breitz Too Long Didn't Read, and she looks at our shrinking attention spans in an information economy that is flooded literally by various social media platforms, the 24-hour news cycle, and she examines white
Yeah.
privilege and visibility and the celebrity fetishizing that occurs in our daily lives. And so we have two works on view of hers that will hopefully be back on view in the museum very soon, and we are exploring a digital component of that as we speak. But those two works are Love Story from 2016, which features the experiences of 6 refugees told by Hollywood actors Julianne Moore and Alec Baldwin, and TLDR, which is the acronym or the short form of Too Long Didn't Read from 2017, which is co-produced in dialogue with the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force in Cape Town, South Africa. So those two works are of Candice Breitz's presentation in the museum. And the second, I will say, is Katerina Grossa, who is also Berlin-based. She is an installation artist who works in situ at a grand scale, usually taking on the machismo of the abstract expressionists, such legendary artists as Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning, and uses that vocabulary, that pictorial vocabulary of the energized brushstroke and the unit of color but it explodes it. And in this case, she has taken about 2 tons of canvas, draped them in some of our largest installation spaces, and painted them. And you can literally walk through this wonderland. And it basically deconstructs the stretcher and the canvas that one is accustomed to seeing, I should say, on a wall. And one is able to walk through a painting. And she is somebody who I think is a very sophisticated formal artist, and her social agenda is more layered and nuanced than, say, Candice Brights's, but it is a commentary on the male-dominated art world in its own way. One artist whom we're featuring in our presentation this year is Zachary Drucker, and Zachary Drucker is an artist, producer, and activist based in Los Angeles. And the show is called Zachary Drucker Icons, and it weaves together 2 personal narratives. One is based on self-portraiture and thus of Zachary, and the other is of Zachary's mentor and friend Rosalind Blumenstein, who directed the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center in the 1990s, which pioneered the Gender Identity Project. So the show is mostly portraiture, and it's quite beautiful. It spans decades. It records and chronicles the trans community. It explores the cinematic and the bodily desires of femininity, and I think it's quite beautiful, and it offers a different perspective on woman.
And you, as a curator and art historian, how did you, through your career, how did you experience this idea of the male-dominated art world?
Gosh, I think it's pretty much the ways that many of us have encountered any of the worlds that we navigate, right? There is a predominance of men at the top, and the idea of the glass ceiling is something that is very real for very many different fields.
Yep.
There are so many talented women who are doing extraordinary things, and for some reason, leadership in so many different kinds of fora are populated by men. And I saw this in throughout my life, and I also saw it in the academic field. And there were moments when I'm married, I have children. When I was considering having children, I would get the the conversation by certain folks in the academic field about, are you sure you want to be doing this? Isn't this going to hurt your career? And I think to talk about those conversations and to acknowledge the sexism and the realities that one has to navigate in being a woman and facing these kinds of biological, structural, societal challenges is something that we very much want to also have as a part of the searching conversations we're all having.
Yeah, that's so true. I really liked on the website of the museum, you're asking women to tell you about their perspective of what it means to be an artist and what it should mean. And I think it's opening a dialogue to everybody. And I really love what some of the women say. There is Se Jong Cho, who says this is about taking control of our destiny. I think this is really beautiful. There's another woman called Megan Lewis who says being a woman artist means holding myself up to the highest narrative and visual standard possible. And Joy Davis, who says, when I hear woman artists, that's in quote, I immediately think of the empowering opportunities we create.
I think those are such beautiful examples that you've selected, and I hope they resonate with your audiences all over the world, because I think many of us feel this way, and it's just so heartening to hear these words and to have you read them. And I think also it's important for many people who collect art, who perhaps don't give this as much thought as they had before, to think about the choices that we all make when we do go to that, local art fair and start to put our money down. What kind of message we're sending? and whom we're actually supporting. I know that
Yes.
many in our local community, they're very sophisticated art collectors and they have extraordinary collections. And many of them have been thinking about these issues from the very beginning, particularly by collecting the beloved abstract expressionist painter and Maryland Institute College of Art teacher Grace Hardigan, her work. And I think that it says a lot about our community and our board of trustees, but it also says a lot about the ways that there's still room for growth here in terms
Yes.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
what people see on the walls of not only museums but also in the homes and in our digital worlds where we're putting our taste on display. All of these things make a difference.
Is it something you discussed while creating this entire program for this year? Did you discuss this idea of what do you want to trigger in for other curators, other museums?
No, I think that's a very good question. We didn't so much think about how other museums would react so much as what kind of energy and intellectual framework we wanted to set within our own museum and as a standard for us in our social justice agenda and our search for equity and diversity and excellence, how we could continue to push the boundaries on all three aspects of our mission. And so for us, it was a matter of how can we do this in the most rigorous way without essentializing women, without stereotyping them, without stereotyping female artistic production, without stereotyping these artists or exploiting in any way the circumstances in which they worked under, and to do it sensitively and to provide a range of artistic expression, a range of artistic backgrounds, and different media. And so we were quite, to come back to your original question about how we came to pick these artists, we were quite methodical in that way in trying to make sure that we hit different registers of all of these issues: artistic production, background, um, vocabularies, etc. And so I think we landed on a very wonderful assortment, but one that also asks us to look at the ways that we have traditionally viewed art history and the ways that many of
Yeah.
many of these artists have been making incredible art all along that perhaps hasn't reached the textbooks.
I really like this. And did you get any feedbacks from other museums around the world about
We
this?
have we have
Excellent.
some museums have said, I wish we could do this. We can't.
Wow.
Um, and that's been quite forthcoming. Other museums have been emulating us and have been inspired by us. And I think other museums have also said that this is something that we should all be trying to do, not just for 1 year, but for the future overall. We should be trying to have a majority presentation of female identifying artists, or a majority acquisitions process, or at least a more equal acquisitions process of female identifying artists' works.
This is really exciting because it means that there is an underlying energy of something
Yeah,
that's going to keep
yeah,
going. Yeah.
yeah, I think so. I think it made me feel empowered in a way that I haven't felt in a long time. It's kind of the moment that we've all been waiting for, I feel,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of arts leadership and artists. And it feels good. And I will say that, yes, in this current environment where the museum is closed, it is something that we are um, not deterred by and are hoping to extend both in terms of our digital presence and, perhaps in our presentations once we do open up again.
Yeah. What this is so wonderful. And for you being a woman in the art world, how do you see the general state of the art world right now? Do you have a vision of where are we at for women equality, women in the arts and their artwork and how they shown? Where do you think we are?
I think we are part of a historic moment, one that we will not be able to fully understand until we're well past it. But I think the demands being made on museum leadership and the arts world in general by the various movements of Black Lives Matter, of equity, and in terms of how our trustees are selected, in terms of patronage. I think that all of those issues are making us really question the role of the museum in our society at large and understand ways that our cultural capital is an important one that radiates into other different kinds of areas. And so I think that for the art world in general, I would say that we are questioning, we are asking. It's both exciting and a little bit old news, right? There's people who were there's hard, all of these female artists, activists who from the 60s on have been asking
Yeah.
for these kinds of demands and rights,
Yeah.
and feel like it's fallen on deaf ears. But I do think that we are coming to a point where these issues are being addressed finally on a leadership level and with those who hold the purse strings. And so I think that this will be a sea
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, because women have contributed so much to art history. And what I think is really great what's happening right now with museums for the past couple of years, and in some case much more years, is that I really feel there is a desire to reach a bigger audience and to try to reach everybody on a new level, in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we even see this since there's been confinement all over the world. Museums have done a humongous effort in such a short time, I feel, to really include people in their virtual museum, in their life. Museums are really trying to reach as many people as possible. Would you say I'm right with this?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it's fascinating to think about the ways in which museums have, from the very beginning, been part of the public fabric, the social fabric, and welcoming to people from all different kinds of backgrounds, and the ways that the Gilded Age and capitalism have inflected that. And created this kind of rarefied audience for the museum world by the end of the 19th century, and now how we're seeing the pendulum swing back to that more populist and democratic aim. And I think it's something that acknowledges the ways that art it doesn't just feed our soul, but it is a way to discuss so many important facets of our daily existence and of our more deeper questions that we're all trying to answer. And so the fact that we're trying to open our doors and bring in families with young children, to bring in people who have probably never come through a museum's doors before, that's a really important and necessary part of the role of institutions like museums in social intercourse. And I think it's really important. I will also say that popular culture and the various interrelated artistic fields like music, like film, I think are reaching a new level of porousness with the art world. And I think that
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
I think that Beyonce and Jay-Z's video in the Louvre,
Yes.
which broke so many different kinds of barriers, is one example of the ways in which privilege is being questioned.
Absolutely. And that is, again, I think, why this period in time is so interesting. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sure. Well, Moran, I want to thank you, first of all, for your own leadership in this realm. And I think it's very important to have individuals such as yourself who are both artists and activists and creatives participating in this conversation.
Thanks.
And I would say to your audience out there in the world, wherever you are, that this is meant to be a light for all of us, an inspiration for all of us to think more boldly and to try to push more boundaries and to keep expressing oneself and to keep making. There are opportunities that one may not realize that will be coming down from the work that we're doing right now.
And thank you, Asma, for creating this wonderful show with the help of everybody that works with you and around you. This is groundbreaking, I think, and I'm very excited to see what's going to be after that, what's going to come after that.
Thanks so much.
This was a great show. It brings so much excitement and positivity for the future. I am really happy about it. Please, everybody, keep safe, be healthy, and peace to all of you and your friends and family. On Display is produced by Raw and Radical, an inspirational movement, resource, and community for women who want to be creative and live a creative life. You can find out more about the artists on this series by going to rawradical.com. Please leave us a comment and a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It truly helps other people discover the show. Please visit us and subscribe to our newsletter to get updates and more goodies. I am Maren Brodberg. Thanks for listening.